I've been retired 3 years, and I kind of use it for comedic effect at times now.
It works.
If I'm speaking to, to a Labour MSP or a Tory MSP and so on, I kind of quite like them to call me Professor. But most other people, like yourselves, humans, I don't use it. And as you can imagine, at home it's not much used, except in an ironic way. Mainly because, and perhaps the highlight was, I've maybe mentioned this in my blog, that I did rather foolishly late in life get addicted to drugs. I grew up in the 60s and 70s with tremendous opportunities, went to university, still in university in the 70s, tremendous opportunities to become addicted to drugs, but didn't. And then in my 60s I got addicted to opioid painkillers, just as you do accidentally. I'm off them all now, quite an experience. And my wife said, empathetically, "Some effing professor you are." Getting addicted to drugs, so we don't need to use a professor, it's John. And also, I mean, the professor thing is, there's another slightly humorous aspect to it. When professors retire, they're often called Professor Emeritus. You heard that term at all? That crazy woman Stevenson at Airdrie University, expert in German history, Nazi history, she's Professor Emeritus. Oh no, she's not, she's Merita, I think it's the feminine version. I fell out with the University of the West of Scotland because I reported them for the misuse of public funds, sending the principal to the Seychelles to recruit students. He's from Australia. I fell out, so I'm now Professor Emeritus. Okay. So on the train up, I thought I'll update the opening words, and I wrote down without having to consult any notes at all. It just flowed out of me. I wrote down a few paragraphs, and when I don't look at them now, I can't remember a word. But I wrote them without any help an hour ago. This is clearly a short-term memory thing developing of some kind, so I will maybe have to look at them now and again. There are some handouts, but not enough. I was thinking that because the screen is big, but maybe not that big for the back row, I'd put the handouts at the back, but some of them made their way at the front. This happens all the time. Let's not worry about that too much. I'll try and talk loudly about what's on the slides so that if you can't see it. Is there anyone at the back particularly struggling that might like to move to the front now? I used to be a school teacher. I used to move the back row to the front because I knew I couldn't trust them, essentially. Okay, well I just plough on then. I'll just plough on. Okay, I'm starting with that lovely photograph there. This is a presentation I've done before twice. Well, it's an updated version, and the previous two locations were Kilmarnock and Inverurie. I move in circles. I mean, some people go to Milan and Belgrade or whatever, I don't know, but I do Kilmarnock, Inverurie, and now Airdrie. And no harm to Airdrie here, I'm not saying anything, and I'm not going to rate any of those three. This is the biggest turnout, so that's something, so that's the biggest turnout. The Inverurie group were called Girio Women for Change, but they weren't all women. And this is regardless of all the current controversy.
That's a change.
Well, that's
a change.
It crossed my mind. I think they were interested in changing other things, not just the constitutional arrangement. So anyway, this is what I scribbled down. I scribbled down, to try and set the scene. And no offence, but most of you are old enough to remember 2014 quite well. Once upon a time, I wrote here, 5 or 6 years ago, a small group of senior news management people at Pacific Quay. They were connected to each other, they were connected to the Labour Party, sometimes through marriage, sometimes through jobs, sometimes through honours, and sometimes through the need to actually reward each other through appointments. That's not what I wrote. But they set an agenda. They set an agenda then to defeat the independence movement and to undermine the Scottish government, especially at that time the Scottish leader, the leader of the SNP, who they saw as an obvious target. There was no conspiracy. This is something I often talk about here. And I'm a long-time student of the work of Noam Chomsky, and no conspiracy is required. There are very few conspiracies, hardly any conspiracies. People act in their own interests, and if they're a member of an elite, then they act in the interests of that elite, and it all just works. And those further down the system who are afraid of them or who depend on them for a promotion, they work towards them. Nobody tells them. So, no conspiracy I've written here. They acted in their own interests, and their interests were in maintaining the union and also the strength of the Labour Party, because they had benefited from that. They had good, well-paid jobs within the union. Why would they want change? It's natural. We're like that. Junior staff at that time, and still today, they were rarely, if ever, told what to do. I've spoken to some junior BBC staff there, sometimes who've told me privately they're actually in favour of independence. I've spoken to technical staff and to cleaners at Pacific Quay and so on, but also some of the junior reporting staff who are in favour of independence. They're still afraid. They were very afraid in 2014 because a man called John Robertson was there, and one of the younger reporters there told me that getting out of that office, you had to go by his door, and he compared it to a bulldog in a kennel guarding the entrance. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say too much about John Robertson now. He's not a Times reporter, writes for the Times, a kind of correspondent to the Times. But there was no conspiracy. The young just knew what to do. Nobody had to tell them. They knew what kind of things to write about. They knew how to write about it, because that was how you would get on. And that's how you'd be able to pay your mortgage and drive your kids to school. It didn't require any conspiracy. Now, a lot of people in the Yes movement do believe in a conspiracy, and they often accuse me of being a bit soft on this, or vague, or academic, I don't know which. But there are very few pieces of evidence of any kind of conspiracy there. That's all changed a bit. That's all changed a bit. That's not a very good phrase. That has certainly changed in the sense that there's now only one member of that kind of elite still there, and that's the Princess of News Media, Sarah Smith, who was awarded her position with BBC Scotland on the basis of really her heritage, I think, and her genes. But the culture that they created in 2014 does persist, and it's become habitual. It's not, I don't think, very often a very conscious thing. So, faced with a First Minister, for example, that they can't easily demonise, they had opportunities with Alex Salmond. There were ways. He was a colourful, larger-than-life character, combative. You know, as a man of a certain age, I kind of long for that. That slightly more combative approach to things. I appreciate it might not have been the best way to deal with it. There may be, I don't know where the evidence is, but a lot of people say it doesn't work very well, that combative approach. I mean, now have a First Minister who's very impressive, tremendously impressive, and more restrained, and doesn't indulge in that kind of combative approach to the BBC. This means it's quite difficult for the BBC to land a punch directly on the Scottish Government. And this is the thesis that I'm looking at just so much, is that naturally, maybe subconsciously, reporters are drawn to opportunities which they're not sitting thinking, how can we undermine the Scottish Government today? It's a habit now. Something negative comes up about one of the services that the Scottish Government is responsible for, the health service in particular, policing, fire service, transport we were talking about earlier, then that becomes a natural thing to do. They're not, I think, really in any obvious way conspiring. It's past that point. It's habit, it's nature for them to do that. So that's what this is coming from, and I'm going to look at the evidence that that's the case, what I've said. I'll start off with some tasters, which I appreciate I can tell you'll have some experience of all of this already, so this may not be, despite the opening credits here, this will not all be new to you, I'm sure. I'm going to start with some recent developments before going on to the core of the presentation, which is shamelessly the presentation I did in the brewery. But it's got this new bit in the front, okay? So, that's a classic photograph, but what's in particular significant about not just the photograph is the phrase, call for heads to roll. Who made the call for heads to roll, do you think? They don't tell you who it was. Jackson Carlo.
Jackson Carlo.
Yeah, well, you're supposed to boo at that point. Yeah. Go on, boo. Who's Jackson Carlo? Yes. But that's a classic. Now what's particularly interesting about that is that it's naked politicising of hospital delays with images of Sturgeon and Freeman and talks of heads rolling. It's the contrast that tells you there's something happening there. And again, it wasn't a conspiracy, it was natural. Somebody saw that photograph and thought, great, some creepy little creature somewhere saw that and thought, great, we can connect that to the hospital. Crisis, allegedly. Royal Liverpool Hospital, 2 years late, 335 million, is that a bit more than the Kids Hospital in Edinburgh? No mention of the Health Minister or heads rolling, and just, that's the Mayor of Liverpool, who I guess might be Labour, Mayor of Liverpool, or Lib Dem, I'm not sure. But that's the Mayor there. The Midland Met. I notice these hospitals don't have to be called Queen Margaret University Hospital. They get to keep the local names, unlike the new Southern General, which that's interesting. That's another topic, I suppose. But again, this one's 4 years late. No call for the Health Minister and heads rolling, not even from a local Labour MP who came on. He didn't call for any heads to roll. There's a sharp contrast there. It's only one example I know, but I think when the examples tumble one upon the other, it tells you there's something happening. And again, it's not a conspiracy, it's a habit. It's now a habit with one or two people. You might, maybe Sarah Smith, I don't know. Maybe Sarah Smith is conspiring. Maybe she's thinking about how can I undermine the Scottish government. I think there may be an element of that with her. But for a lot of the youngsters, I think it's just what they do. This is quite a sharp contrast with the coverage of the infections in the Glasgow hospitals. You remember that people, children commonly in the Glasgow hospitals died after, the word after was used, after getting a fungal infection, or died, sometimes I think Jackie Bird said they died from. It's quite interesting it was Jackie Bird and it was a kind of bird flu, I thought. I don't know how that happened. And clearly she's got it, she's gone. You cheer at that point. So that was booing for Jackson Corler, cheering for Jackie Bird. Look, this is very sharp. Now, strep is short for something like streptococcus or something like that. It's a deadly bacterium, not as Lisa Summers would have it, a bacteria. Sheesh. She's their health correspondent. She doesn't know that bacterium is singular and bacteria is plural. I'm into teacher mode now. No call was made in BBC UK's website. No call was made for heads to roll or any mention of the health minister. 15 people were killed by a bacterium. They were killed by it, transmitted by privatised health workers. Not one mention of political responsibility in the piece, and no images of the PM or the health minister. You can know that BBC Scotland would call for heads to roll at the very least. Here's another example. These are more recent examples of the kind of unconscious bias that is there daily and which tumbles together to create something, I think. These are about shortages of psychiatrists, not psychologists, and there's an important distinction to be made in a minute. Psychiatrists. Top left is the Herald, top right is BBC UK, bottom right the Guardian, bottom left is BBC Scotland. Spot the difference. Spot the wee girl. Notice the wee girl in the picture for BBC Scotland. The word crisis, to be fair, is used in the two Scottish outlets there. The Herald used the word crisis and BBC Scotland used the word crisis, but the Guardian and the BBC UK don't use the word crisis. They're much more kind of factual, descriptive, and they don't use that picture. I thought the picture was tasteless. I thought the picture was tasteless. There's no need for that picture to be in there. I don't think it adds anything. But when I wrote and complained, they said they were quite happy to say that, as the report pointed out, that vacancies for consultant psychiatrists were proportionally much higher for child and adolescent mental health services. That was why they'd chosen that picture. Nothing to do with scaring, shocking, titillating the viewer. It was factual, objective was their view of it. Again, on its own, it's not much. It's part of a train. And this is a regular. This is the interviewing of a leading psychiatrist or a leading doctor, a leading surgeon. Often you find that leading medical people are actually trade unionists. And you know, I'm very much in favour of trade unions. But trade union leaders being presented as leading doctors or is not accurate. She's presented as a leading psychiatrist, and she was clearly fed a leading question. She says, but I guess the bottom line is that the answer is yes. You know, what was the question? Without the kind of mental health prevention, protection and treatment that we all need in our lives, in other words, more psychiatrists, yes, people would be put at risk. And she was clearly fed with that question, do you think people will be put at risk? Do you think the shortage of psychiatrists is going to cause real harm here? And she said yes, not surprisingly. She is a trade unionist. She is also, no doubt, a very good psychiatrist. I have no reason of any opinion either way there, but she is representing a professional body, which is a kind of trade union. I've been criticised about this before, but I kind of insist. Royal colleges are trade unions. They may have lots of academic activity going on, they may have some great people working for them, but they are still essentially trying to pursue the interests of their members for more staff, better pay, better conditions and so on. And I wondered if they kind of stumbled on there, a kind of turf war, because you might know that the number of psychologists are people without a medical degree, but who have a degree in psychology, specialised in it, they've been increasing in large number in the last 10 years, a 40% increase in the number of psychologists. but there are vacancies in psychiatry. So I wonder if that was, they were maybe happy to say that because of that kind of turf war, and I think there was a similar one between GPs and the idea of using nursing staff instead of GPs. There was a kind of similar thing happened there a year or two ago. It's something the BBC naturally think, again, the reporters think, that's a good one. We'll use that. Again, not necessarily directly trying to damage the Scottish Government, but the consequences, I think, are there as you gradually pile one upon the other. This was a unique thing. This only happened just over a month ago. It was a first. I had 4 weeks in hospital a couple of years ago, and I spoke to the staff there about their media consumption. Almost without exception, they did not watch the news. They just didn't watch the news at all. These were mental health people. They didn't watch the news at all. Some of them said, I did watch it, but I got so depressed by it. They were mainly depressed by what they saw as constant criticism, capping criticism against the BBC, against their work. And they were all good, hard-working people and didn't deserve that. So they were angry about that, and they just weren't watching anymore. And I've often been asked, well, why don't they fight back? Why don't top psychiatrists, professors, and so on of medicine, why don't they strike back against the BBC? And for years they haven't done that, but they did. On the 18th of October, they wrote an open letter. A group of health professionals there, I think it was 11 of them, 11 signatories, wrote an open letter. These were people working in the mental health area. And they said, they accused the BBC of misrepresenting Scotland's mental health services. 11 signatories. They went on to actually talk about public trust being undermined, and they then went on to talk about the risks. Because if you portray a health service as underperforming, you may say that's a public watchdog thing to do. It's appropriate to sit for news media to report a health service underperforming. But if you continually do it, and if you do it on a basis of inaccurate data, you're in danger of actually causing harm. Because people might sit back at home and say, I better not go. You know, they're too busy. Or maybe it's not that bad. And obviously I'm not going to be like the Sun or the Daily Mail and say, you know, these media are causing deaths. But they might be causing some people to be fearful. And the one particular example, which isn't in my presentation, is a few years back, Lisa Summers spent ages talking about a mother whose child had died in the birth process. The child had died by having its head removed in the birth process. They drooled over it. Photographs, talking to the mother, tearful interviews and so on. And I thought, people were just about to go into hospital to give birth. What do you think about that? It makes some of them a bit fearful. I think, I think there's a shocking tendency sometimes just to go for the story. And BBC, you would think, shouldn't be like the Daily Mail or the Sun. They should have a certain kind of restraint. So this is the first time, but only the National reported it. None of the other media reported it. It's an open letter from professionals, 11 health professionals, and it got no attention outside of social media and the National. That's a clear example of bias by omission. People often ask me about, why do you constantly carp about the media that you see, about the reporting you see, and say how bad it is? Why don't you talk about the stuff they're not saying, the stuff they're missing? And I agree that's quite important, but it's quite difficult to do. Because if something's not being reported, it's hard to accuse somebody of bias for not reporting it, because they say, well, there were 1,000 stories out there that night, we could have chosen something else. It's difficult to be scientific about bias by omission. But that's a clear example, that's a naked example of bias by omission. 11 health professionals write an open letter protesting. Silence. Okay, that was the taster. Do you all need a drink now after that? I'm not recommending drink as the solution. So this is the kind of core of the thing, and that's what I'm going to cover there. This is the point at which I spent a lot of time in higher education. This is the point at which I see the students start to settle in their seats a bit, and maybe one or two start to sigh a wee bit as they see, what, there's 1, 2, 3, how many bits is he going to cover? What I'm going to hope to do is to explain why and how. You might think, well, what's the point in the first one? Why is the state broadcaster biased against independence? Because it's the state broadcaster. What's a proxy war? I've kind of touched on all of these. Why do they need a proxy propaganda war? Why do they go for NHS Scotland in particular? What effect might it have on voting behaviour? It's a much more subjective one. I've got 4 examples: the obesity campaign and the pigeon poo campaign and the breast cancer campaign. I hope I'm not being frivolous and flippant about these, but maybe I chose the word campaign ironically here. and the staffing campaign. And if there's time, there's one that I'm particularly interested in, that's IVF treatment. Gets virtually no attention. Year after year, NHS Scotland hit the target on IVF. They satisfy, and there'll be examples of people who are not satisfied with it, but they seem objectively to be hitting the target pretty effectively year after year. And the situation south of the border is appalling. It's catastrophic in some parts of England and Wales, the situation there. And researchers have shown, I'm kind of doing this ahead of time here, researchers have shown that IVF treatment is not just important for those people having babies, it's important for the mental health of women. Very important. And in studies in places like Denmark have shown failure to get IVF treatment has knock-on effects for the NHS, or for the health service, in mental health problems in particular. And yet, again, bias by omission, the story is of no interest, apparently, to any of our mainstream media. If you want to say something, just stick your hand up like a school pupil.
So there's none of the junior reporters raising these? You're saying there's no conspiracy, so these people you're speaking to, none of these stories are coming through and getting blocked, they're just not originating at all in the BBC? I don't know
if any of them are being blocked or not. I mean, that might be the case. I just know from speaking to one or two that they tend to think, what will I get published? So they tend to think, you know, that is the person above me in the line, the editor of Distorting Scotland or whatever, are they going to like this? Because they don't want to waste time. They don't want to write a story and have somebody say, oh no, sorry, we don't want to do that. So they tend to prevent that blocking by actually blocking themselves. They self-censor, yeah. So, right. So, why is the state broadcaster biased against independence? Since the beginning of the Cold War, at the very least, MI5 have been involved in appointments, especially the senior staff. It's maybe not surprising that it happened in the Cold War. MI5 is home security, MI6 is foreign affairs, for those who are not into this kind of thing. They've been doing it for quite a long time. So, I mean, the first response is, well, why wouldn't they be doing that kind of thing? BBC Scotland is not responsible to anyone in Scotland. It's responsible to the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport in Westminster. That is their line of responsibility. When I was called to the Scottish Parliament a few years back to defend my own research, and BBC Scotland were also called to defend themselves against my research, reluctantly they came, but only after BBC London told them to come. They were going to refuse, because they're not responsible. They don't have to. They can do what they like, in that sense. In Scotland, in England, being in the Labour Party would have been a bit of a bar to promotion to senior posts in the BBC, especially if you were to the left of the Labour Party. But in Scotland, the Labour Party largely inherited the establishment position that the Tory Party have in the south. And so, as long as you were kind of right of centre, playwright sort of Labour, that wasn't a disadvantage. MI5 wouldn't have blocked that kind of thing. In fact, I'm quite happy with that, probably. Senior staff have been appointed with Scottish Labour approval. John Boothman did training for the Labour Party before and after his appointment as head of news. And Sarah Smith, well, she's from a dynasty with long connections with the Labour Party, and she and her sister are prominent in Scottish society, Glasgow University, BBC, Labour Party, that kind of network. The staff are often related to and friendly with Scottish Labour. Again, this is more in the past. This is more than 5-6 years ago. These things are changing. Sarah Smith perhaps the main survival, but you might remember Jack and McConnell and Kirsty Work going on holiday together with their partners. I hasten to add, because I don't want to think of Jack McConnell and Kirsty Work together. Boo again, yeah. John Boothman and Susan Deakin, prominent Labour politician Susan Deakin, and of course the Smith dynasty, which you can probably add Dugdale to that now, because they've given Dugdale a job at Glasgow University. My fourth child, the youngest one, is at Glasgow just now doing politics, and she doesn't mention me at all. I've told her, don't mention me. might not help. There. And she's seen what's her first name? Dugdale. Kezia. She's seen Kezia on the stairs looking very glum. Have you ever seen a picture of Kezia not looking glum? Was she? She was smiling? Ah, there we go, that's the first one. What was that about?
Just the coming election.
Oh, I see. Oh, of course she's still interested, is she? Right, okay. Well, her dad follows me on Twitter. I have to add on Twitter very quickly there, because you see her dad follows me, it starts to sound a bit kind of creepy. But, so, what you've got is staff there with good pay, conditions and security. They're naturally inclined towards the status quo. We're all kind of like that. In my time at the University of the West of Scotland and Craigie College before, I can look back and I can remember some things I did. I was the head of the department for 6 years. I did some things I'm ashamed of, because the management above me expected me to do them. I was kind of middle management, kicked by both sides, you know. But I did things I think, that was a bit cold, rational, calculating, not very human. And so we're all social animals, so we're under that pressure, and I'm not saying I forgive them entirely. The reporters are conditioned within that pre-existing culture. A lot of them come from the press, from the unionist press to the BBC in the first place, come from the Herald to the BBC or Daily Record to the BBC or whatever. They know what's required by senior staff. There's little coercion. A lot of their biased behaviour, I think, becomes semi-conscious, doing what seems right, normal to them. And that lack of an obvious conspiracy leads to the audience trusting them. A lot of people still trust the BBC. It's quite difficult to mistrust the BBC because they see all these great nature programmes, and also there's no sign of that obvious conspiracy. They're hardly ever caught out. In a very naked kind of way, they're hardly ever caught out. Okay, a proxy war. A proxy war is a war between two enemies where direct conflict is too dangerous. So like in Vietnam, Afghanistan and Angola, the Soviet Union and the Americans couldn't fight each other directly, so they had proxies. They would have the jihadis in Afghanistan fighting against the Soviets, or in Angola they'd have the Cubans fighting the South Africans, but they didn't get involved directly because it's too dangerous. A proxy war is one where you can't really do anything directly, so you have to get somebody else to do it for you, or find some other route round it. And as I've said already, BBC Scotland find it hard to hand the glove on the SNP Scottish Government. One of the most popular governments in European history. Opinion polls to show that. Clearly very popular, and I think objectively quite competent, really. You know, I mean, I'm not an uncritical enthusiast for the party, but I think, you know, if you compare them with some others, they're pretty good, really. And there's an opinion poll that had the Scottish Government as 61% most trusted, whereas the UK government was only trusted 20% in that same poll. It's a 2017 poll. The SNP is still strong in the polls. A wee bit of a dip recently in some of the sub-polls into the high 30s, which is making me a wee bit anxious. But still, despite Salmon Gate and the Civil War, not much sign really of the party being much weakened by these attempts by the media to somehow undermine them. I think the First Minister and the Cabinet, the top people, are quite kind of capable, competent. When you compare them with the leaders in the Conservatives and Lib Dems and Labour, really, it's almost laughable, the contrast in terms of ability there. But and this is the centre of this idea here, the Scottish Government is responsible for the health service, for education and crime. These are infinitely improvable. Like education, you could always do better. Crime, until you got crime down to zero, which obviously you're never going to get, there's always opportunity, there's always something that can be found. Oh, it went up 1% this year. Did you notice the murder rate went up this year?
By one.
By one. The 10-year trend, of course, which is a trend. I'm not a statistician, but I know that a 1-year change doesn't matter, because you don't know much from 1-year change. It's the 10-year change you look at. But as you know, BBC Scotland went for murder rate up. They did kindly use the word slightly.
The interesting thing when you talk about BBC Scotland in all of these situations is I listen to Radio 4 all the time, and constantly in Radio 4, when they're bringing in information about any of these situations, they constantly praise Scotland, and you have somebody talking on about this is how Scotland have handled this is how Scotland are dealing with this, and it's very positive.
Yeah.
And they've got so many experts coming in from Scotland talking about how we do it and how we do it better, and yet BBC Scotland is the complete opposite.
I mean, that's a very interesting contrast between other parts of the BBC and BBC Scotland, and that they commonly undermine BBC Scotland. Not meaning to, of course, because they're not really concerned with it, but BBC One at 6 o'clock will sometimes report on very positive things in Scotland, and then reporting Scotland will just ignore it, as if to say that, and hoping you didn't watch it, you didn't make the connection there. That's something I haven't covered, but it's a very interesting trend, or phenomenon, I think, really, rather. Okay, so health is complex, it's massive, it's a major part of the economy, a major part of our lives, so there's always opportunities there, and there's some evidence that creating generalised anxiety can affect behaviour patterns in terms of voting. That people who are anxious are more likely to say, let's have no change. I'm already worried, let's keep things the way they are. Again, I don't think there's any conscious conspiracy by the BBC to make you anxious so that you'll vote for no change. they act in their own interests. But the effect might be that.
You keep using this conspiracy,
Yeah, for lack of.
and like you, we speak to the people in BBC Buy, we know a lot of people
Yeah.
that work for BBC, but there's complacency. We know a lot of people that have talked to us
Yeah.
off the byline. They're independent supporters,
Yeah.
but the complacency in the BBC to impress their
Whose complacency? Do you mean the people
The
who are for
staff.
independence or the people
yes,
who are not?
staff, the workers,
Are they,
right.
are they not fearful rather than complacent?
that as well.
That too, yeah.
But
Yeah.
again, and you say you believe in trade unions, that being a trade union's dominates, they don't belong to any
No.
political movement,
No.
party or whatever. I've never think meeting the British unions be unison or unite, right?
Mhm.
They should be using them as a force against the BBC with all this rubbish that is produced by the national broadcaster.
You would hope
So
that
they
would.
are complacent.
Yes. Aye. Well, I suppose
Without them,
yeah.
Deacon and Smith and all that wouldn't have the material.
Yeah. I suppose there's a kind of weakness there as well. People have,
You
people
know,
have got jobs and are
that's
fearful.
what I'm saying,
you know,
John. I know what
Yeah.
you're saying about the jobs. Everybody's
Yeah.
fearful about their employment in this day and age.
Yeah.
But as independent supporters, there is complacency to produce this level of nonsense.
Yeah. That's right.
Again, and it's MI5, it's a British propaganda unit.
Absolutely. So, what effect might it have on this? I'm on thin ice here. I have a background in social science, and in social science you can't say anything at all. Ever, virtually. All you can say, well, I think we'll come up with some new questions here we could ask. We've spent 20,000 on this research, 3 years on it, and we've come up with better questions. Let's on we go with the next research project here. So I'm going to leap a bit with this one, and I'm going to ask what effect might bias have on voting behaviour. There is no hard scientific evidence for this. Latterly, I worked in the School of Media and mainly trying to get students that wanted to play with cameras to write essays, which was a bit demanding at times. But one of the things I researched there was media effects. Hardly any media effects have been shown to be there. People worry about media effects. Back in the 80s when I was still teaching, I remember all the parents were worried about the kids in my class watching video nasties. I did a survey for a maths thing to do a bar graph. What's your favourite video? VHS was just out. Favourite video. Quite disturbingly popular in my class of 11, 12-year-olds in 1980-ish was I Spit on Your Grave. Don't remember that one. I haven't seen it myself, but quite a lot of 11, 12-year-olds in 1980 had seen I Spit on Your Grave, so it got a bar on there. And parents were worried about it. Parents have been worried about computer games, they've been worried about endless things. People have been worried about girls' magazines, fashion magazines and so on. There are hardly any proven media effects. It seems that young people, and adults too, are much more resilient than you think. And this leads to some weakness in my idea that the biased media is affecting the independence campaign. But hard research shows that young people who've committed violent acts tend to have consumed less violent media than the rest of the children in that age group. Because children who commit violent acts are a bit isolated, they're outside of society a bit. They tend not to have as much access to computers and televisions and so on. So it's the children who are not violent who've seen more violence. I'm not saying it works the opposite way. You see lots of violence so you don't do it. But there's not a strong connection there. Sex offenders have not watched more pornography. Sex offenders have watched less pornography than the average member of the public. We won't get into that one in much detail. Those predisposed by their genetics or by childhood abuse, it's a common one, to commit crimes, seem to do regardless of their media consumption. Peer pressure seems more important. What does the rest of your group do? And as an adult, I had three sons and a girl, and with growing up with the three boys, it was like living with the James gang at times. We replaced all the doors in the house a few years ago, 10 doors. How many had been kicked in at some point? 7. 3 boys. Peer pressure. I read that peer pressure was more important, that parents can't really do much. If you look at the statistics, these clever sociologists have done the research, they've shown that adolescent boys will kick the doors in regardless of how their parents work to stop them kicking the doors in. If they're going to kick the doors in, they'll kick the doors in. And it's because of conflict with their brothers or because of peer pressure and so on. That let me off the hook. And we've had all the doors replaced, and I've got one of my sons is down in Warwick, and I'm going to visit him quite soon and kick all these doors in. I'll teach him. Probably hurt my foot as well in the process. Okay? But there's one clear media effect which seems to be demonstrable, and that's generalised anxiety. That's a phrase being used a lot just now, generalised anxiety disorder. People get medication for it now. It's become like a real thing. It's not a kind of variant kind of mood amongst the population. And there's a fairly strong connection there between the amount of consumption of news media that researchers have noticed. Now, which way around it is, of course, is maybe unclear. People who watch lots of news media are more likely to be depressed and anxious, are more likely to be on medication for depression and anxiety. But, of course, it could be that people who are prone to be depressed and anxious are also prone to watch the media. That's sociology for you, yeah? I did sociology at university back in the 70s when it was a cool thing to do. It's kind of cool, you know, I had the Che Guevara t-shirt and stuff like that. And that's the thing, a lot of people say, don't you get really frustrated with that? Because there's never any answer to anything. It's always, well, we could ask a new question now. But I quite like that. It's maybe just my nature, I think. Okay. Now, age and anxiety levels are associated with conservative behaviour trends. It's mainly American research, to be fair. The people who vote Republican, for the Republican Party, are more likely to be people who are anxious or depressed than will vote for the Democrats. Now, there's not much difference to my mind between the Democrats and the Republicans in America, but that kind of thing's been shown there. A preference for the status quo. I'm anxious, I'm worried about life on a day-to-day basis, not more change. Let's just leave everything as it is. You can see that could happen. Reporting Scotland and Good Morning Scotland, although I've started to introduce the letter U after the letter O in morning, they have to call it Good Morning Scotland, and I'm now calling it Reporting Scotland Down, because I've renamed my blog Reporting Scotland Up. They're subject to most complaints, constant flow of complaints. People complain about the website at times, they complain about other things at times, but people who are in favour of independence in particular, complain about Reporting Scotland and Good Morning Scotland on a regular basis. And they're the ones that are consumed, of course, in particular by the older element of the population. That's the other, not the older ones here, you're obviously the intelligent older ones, some of you, as am I, one of the intelligent older ones, but the other ones, you know those other ones. So in voting behaviour, a strong correlation between age and conservatism is there, strong but complex correlation between age and media choices. So older people tend to read newspapers, listen to radio, watch TV. Younger people are getting that more diverse news media on laptops, tablets and phones. Allegedly fake news. I can't help but snigger when I hear that that's fake news and Reporting Scotland somehow isn't fake news.
I was quite impressed with STV's fake news this morning. I was absolutely stunned at it. Boris Johnson says no to a request that's not been sent. I nearly fell out of my bloody chair.
There have been times I've thought, that guy Mackay, not John Mackay, but the other one, not John Mackay, Colin Mackay, he's maybe got some potential, I think. No? I tend to be a bit optimistic by nature, strangely. I think maybe he's got some scope. However, okay, the first case study, the obesity campaign of September 2018. These are sometimes based on complaints that I've actually made to BBC Scotland, and often been quite demoralised by the responses. So they reported that obesity was going to kill more women than smoking, and they had a programme called Shedding the Fat in an Ayrshire mining village, Shoban named, not very far from here itself, where they filmed people there. All of the images were of people with morbid or super obesity. I forget what that is on the scale. But all of the people they filmed, they were struggling to get up and down stairs and so on. They were crying for the camera. It was very kind of icky, the whole thing, as journalism. And they said 12 million, this is over these images of people in an Ayrshire village who were clearly not just obese. You know, the entire Scotland rugby team is obese, according to that BMI index thing. And for a wee while I was very close to being obese. And, you know, it doesn't take much. It's super obese, a different thing. But they said 12 million are now obese. Over 29% of the population have so much fat it's a danger to their lives. And they showed these images of people who are super obese. Now, in actual fact, morbid obesity is far less common. It's 5 to 8% in the UK. So that was just a mistake, maybe, or a lie. I don't know. It's a major distortion of the facts, which I think confuses and maybe concerns the viewers. They lingered morbidly, to titillate, to captivate, to morbidly fascinate the viewer. And there were close-up images of vulnerable people struggling to walk and sobbing. And you have to ask, why did they agree to that kind of invasive filming? It's not clear. I did ask in the complaint if they'd actually paid these people. They were quite indignant about that they hadn't paid these people. to do so. Their answer was, all morbidly obese people are by definition obese. So we can use images of people who are morbidly obese and make comments about general obesity, and it's still accurate, because those morbidly obese people are by definition obese. It was an astonishing response to my mind. So it was wrong, and they thought it was perfectly acceptable to do. They didn't agree it was a distortion of the facts. They then went on and Reporting Scotland, Jackie Bird, in her latter days. Boo at that point. No? You're not? I'm more used to 11, 12-year-olds, obviously. Get a response of that thing. Jackie Bird said, new research suggests that more than 1 in 3 women in Scotland will be morbidly obese by 2035. That's the ones who are going to die, according to them. Their own source on the website was to an academic study from a London School of Research of some kind, which is, I've got the reference for it somewhere, which actually said, the new estimates indicate that rates of morbid obesity in adults will reach 5% in Scotland, 8% in England and 11% in Wales by 2035. So it's 1 in 20, it's not 1 in 3.
It's 1 in 20 Scots, not just women.
Yes, I think the research was women actually. Was it?
The bottom bit just says Scots though, so that
So it
would
does.
be more women.
You know, I hadn't noticed that until now. This always happens in a presentation. There's always something. I've only looked at it 100 times and I've missed that. That's a good point.
Just so Brad Pitt was obese when he did
Yeah.
his movies.
Yeah.
When he was super fit,
Right.
was a Spartan.
Yeah.
So it puts
Right.
obesity in a whole different light when you think about that.
I'm starting to sense the presence of my daughter here. I've made one of those mistakes again. I tend to think, sociology in the 1970s, I'll be quite a liberated kind of guy, I won't make any mistakes on gender issues, but I do still stumble in them, I think partly because of age. Next presentation, that'll be sorted. Here's the apology, the kind of apology I got from them. As you rightly point out, the report on television also said that new research suggested that more than 1 in 3 women in Scotland would be obese. The reference should have been to general obesity. And the editor of Reporting Scotland said, I have investigated this and I believe that was an honest mistake. Made under customary newsroom deadline conditions. We were busy. We can't expect us to get it right. We were busy. You don't know what it's like being a journalist. And then it said, however, to explain is not to excuse, and I have ensured that your detailed comments have been taken aboard by my team. Can you see Jackie Bird's face? Taken on board by my team in order to help prevent such an occurrence again. They wouldn't publish it though. They sent it to me as an email. That was the apology. Wouldn't go any further. That was enough. They didn't accept bias by omission, and they see that LSHTM authors. That sounds like something to do with digital media, doesn't it? That's London School of Health and something medicine. What would the T be? I don't know. London School of Health and it's tropical. That's it. Good. Well done. It was tropical. I don't know why they're doing obesity. Tropical medicine, but never mind. That was published research, and it had some very interesting stuff in it, which again BBC Scotland ignores. This is the bias of omission. Their research showed that no Scottish 15 to 24-year-olds are expected to fall into the category, compared to 6%. That is morbidly obese, dangerously obese. And they compared that with England. They then went on to actually credit Scottish Government initiatives in education and elsewhere for actually dealing with the problem to some extent. I mean, it's still a problem, but the contrast with England and Wales was quite sharp. And again, that was ignored. Okay, now the pigeon poo one. I'm in danger of being flippant about this, and real people were hurt here, so I remember that. You'll remember it well. This was in the New Southern General Hospital. Here's another name. I made a complaint that Jackie Bird had said in January 2019. She had said that the deaths of two patients from a rare fungal infection, and that was inaccurate because we knew from their own website the same day. The health board said one of the patients was elderly and had died from an unrelated cause, and the factors contributing to the death of another patient are being investigated. So in neither case did the patient die from. The word after comes up. Sorry?
Could you speak a bit louder?
Oh, okay, I will.
I'm not finding you.
Okay. There's a seat at the very front.
Turn away.
There's a seat at the front here. Would you like to move? There's a seat right down here.
All right.
If you want. Am I okay for everybody else okay? Yeah. my wife's always given me a row because after years in teaching I tend to project. And if we're in Morrison's, I'll be projecting. Stop it! You're not in a classroom anymore. There you go.
Thank you very much.
That's fine.
Can I ask something? You say there's no, you don't feel there's any conspiracy at the BBC. It's just sort of, I mean, you're the only one in the room who's got that opinion. Which amazes me.
Who agrees with me there's no conspiracy? Really? Bloody hell. Sorry.
No, I was being
Does he just let the BBC buy his job? No, to make
No,
it
no,
right.
I'll let him finish his point now. Yeah.
I'm really surprised how liberal you feel about it. I mean, because I feel there's a conspiracy, or somebody, you know, pulling the strings. How can Jackie Bird get this information written for her, which is so contrary to what's getting reported?
Yeah,
You feel it's just you
Yeah.
know, people under pressure.
Sure, but she didn't write the story.
No.
She's the presenter.
No, I didn't refuse that. Somebody's writing this for her to read out.
Yeah. That's interesting. Nobody agrees with me. Come off.
I thought you had stronger views on it. I mean, you know.
I think historically, as I said at the beginning, I think when John Boothman was there, I think there was a conspiracy to defeat the referendum amongst leading. Yes. But I think that's much diminished because they've gone. But I think what they've left behind them is a culture, and that's not the same as a conspiracy, because they're not getting together first of all to say how can we do this, how can we weaken the Scottish government. I really don't believe they're doing that. Many of you think there are meetings where top BBC Scotland news people get together and discuss undermining the Scottish government.
Well, you just said that now that there's no balance.
Yeah,
You know,
I agree.
so if they're going to give balance and give the full story, then there's no conspiracy, because you've got here's the problem, this is what a possible solution would be, there's a nice bit of balance, but they're omitting stuff out. That's a conscious decision to then inform or not inform the listeners.
At least that was 50-50, I think. On that particular one. Let me just.
They don't have to have meetings. What you do is you've got to think of this on a sort of organisational basis. You put the right people into the right places, and what they do trickles down, and everybody will hence.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
That is exactly what's happening.
That's not a conspiracy.
I mean, I've stood outside the building.
But that's not. I'm just saying these people act in their own interest. It's the same. It's the same with the Eton schoolboys who are in government. They don't get together, I don't think, and conspire. They act in their own interests. They're selfish, and their own interests are the interests of that elite group.
What they tend to do is place people who have similar interests in the positions round about them.
That's right, because they recognise them. So that's why the top journalists in the country are.
It's been like that for years.
70% of top journalists are Oxbridge.
But
But that's not a conspiracy.
They reminded us of the connection between MI5 and BBC, but so it's not there. I mean, so that's not there. I mean, that's how it was in the past, and people were appointed. But I mean,
They're just approving them.
yes.
They're proving that with regard to appointments, I don't think they were looking for somebody to do something.
So that,
They were
you
just
don't feel that
recognised.
connection's there anymore between the BBC and the.
Oh no, I think that'll still be there, yeah. At the top level probably,
Yes.
not at the lower levels.
But isn't that just a case of employing like-minded people, which then you get the end result is that's what's going to get
Well,
printed?
that exactly. That's not a conspiracy.
That's how it works in every organisation.
A conspiracy. A conspiracy has to be. It has to be a. I suppose you could argue what conspiracy is. And we're back in sociology. Everything just falls apart suddenly because anything can mean anything. A conspiracy, to my mind, is a conscious decision made by a group to achieve a political outcome, like to undermine the referendum.
It's like saying up to the charter, the BBC charter as well, wasn't it?
Well, that's right. Which
Holding the values of the British state.
well, but it also, the Royal Charter also says that you will educate and inform, and they don't inform very well. So I don't know about the Royal Charter. I'm not sure exactly I'm not sure about what the problem is here. Actually, this is interesting that I'm not sure what the problem is. I didn't ask it in Inverurie or in Kilmarnock. I think a conspiracy has to be a deliberate, conscious plan to achieve a political outcome by then choosing stories and reporting on them in a particular way, rather than something that's just become a habit.
But don't you think that decision's getting made down in London?
Sorry?
Don't you think that decision's getting made down in London? I mean, you said yourself, I mean, the BBC Scotland's not autonomous, it's run from down south, so
Yeah.
these decisions don't get made.
Sure.
Down south.
Yeah.
Is the conspiracy not placing particular types in particular jobs? That's the conspiracy. And then what happens?
Do you mean the selection panel gets together and decides who to interview on the basis of the fact that they want somebody appointed who will get
He's got
that
a
political
unique
outcome
view,
from it.
he's supporting independence, we'll go with him.
Yeah.
And I think that is, quite often at the very highest level, it's interesting who's on
Yeah.
the interview board.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
You know?
In the School of Journalism or the School of Media I worked in, I knew several who went for interviews with the BBC, and one of them said to me, there were 7 of us there, I was the only one state educated out of 7 interviewees. So it's a class thing as well as an independence thing here.
Different countries are totally different. One of the things that I touched on was working as on a consultancy basis for likes of it was Canon,
Right.
and like an interview for a design team,
Yeah.
and we had met various people in the plant
Yeah.
prior to this interview, and it only turned out at the interview we had bumped into the MD for the plant,
Right.
and when we arrived there he said, do you mind if we take your photograph? And they took face photographs of all our team, and one of our team worked in Hong Kong for a number of years. They said they'll be sending it to, I think it was the Shanji brand, who analysed faces.
Yeah.
And as a consequence of this, the MD made, it was the tea ceremony that was presented
Right.
to us because our faces were trustworthy. Now it's a different, the team from other groups were connected to various people.
If that sounds like a good thing for the BBC to adopt, trustworthiness.
Well,
That's not-
the other aspect with
Yeah.
Toyota and Japanese companies is that in Toyota, to get to the top level, you have to have done every job
Right.
up to that point.
Right.
You take British industry, and it's who you went to school with.
Yeah.
It's the old boys club. And
Okay.
I must admit, in the 70s and 80s, I presumed that was dying out. But actually, it's come very much to the fore when you look at Westminster.
Well, it's returned
And
with
I
a
think
vengeance.
The
Can I-
BBC,
Can we kind of maybe agree to differ on what conspiracy is? Because we're liable, but I remain convinced that most of what happens, not all of it, I agree, there will be times that maybe one person will meet with somebody else, but I don't think there's a meeting of 6 people who say, how can we make the media coverage we're presenting today, how can we make it damaging for deliberately how can we make it damaging for the Scottish Government? I really don't believe that ever happens.
How is there such a focused approach then? I mean, how is it not just general? I mean, it's
Well,
such a focused thing.
I'm going to call him a higher name here. Noam Chomsky, Professor Noam Chomsky, I did my PhD on Noam Chomsky's work. He talks about interlocking elites, and he says there is no conspiracy. In America there's no conspiracy for him. He says that all of these people act in their own interests, and their interests are the same as the interests of the elite that they're part of. And so I think he would look at BBC Scotland. He didn't study BBC Scotland. I think he would look at that, and if he interviewed young journalists there, he would find out that, as in Nazi Germany, Hitler didn't tell people what to do. Maybe they say when you mention Nazi Germany, you've lost the argument, but I'm going to use it. In Nazi Germany, Hitler didn't tell people what to do. They thought of things that they thought might please him. They worked towards the Führer. And that kind of idea has been used by other theoreticians, that you work towards the Führer. And it's the same, people were working towards John Boothman for a while. He wasn't telling them what to do, but they damn knew what he liked. So it's not a conspiracy, it's self-censorship. This is maybe an academic point I work with.
It's a about question time. There's quite often a whole group of people from different councils that are Labour or Tory.
Yeah,
And they're
that's right.
And you're not telling me that's just happened by chance.
But again, I haven't done anything about Question Time. I don't think that's a conspiracy. That's the people who run Question Time thinking we must have one from all these parties. So even though we end up with imbalance on the yes movement, or we end up imbalance on Brexit or whatever, we've got to have somebody from each of the parties, and we do that. And there are some people who are...
just as easily be referring to the people in the
It
audience
is the
who
people in the
are
audience.
randomly picked out to be on Question Time 4 times, or they happen to be a Tory councillor or a Labour candidate or something.
I agree, it's a good Question Time is appalling. I mean, I can't... Well, I like to watch Question Time when it's in England, because it's almost like a kind of freak show. I think, are there really people like that who hold those opinions? But the Scottish one gets me a bit angry.
It came from Birmingham last Thursday night, so I did actually sit and watch it. And just after the programme finished, as happens with the Glasgow edition of the show, there were nothing but photographs of audience members who are Conservative Party activists,
that's right,
ex-Conservative Party candidates and all this kind of thing, you know. So it's not just happening up in Glasgow, it's happening right through the BBC.
I agree, but there isn't a meeting of top people saying how can we make Question Time biased against Scottish independence.
Yes.
They're not doing that. They're acting what seems natural to them.
I've been on Question Time a few times, and I've got to say that the chances are that they're not getting phoned up and invited on. They're more driven. These people are more driven to get onto these programmes. And when they get on there, they will make sure that they're heard. So their hand will stay up and they'll make sure that their point's made. And it could well be that they gloss over the fact in their application that they were a Conservative councillor or a Labour activist or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's how they go on, and that's how,
that's
Question
that's not a conspiracy.
Question Time in Glasgow next week. Every one of you is that driven. You should all have applied, even though you disagree with the BBC and all that. You should be that driven that you are doing the same thing as they are, because that's how they're getting on and that's how they're getting heard.
Can I? One more and then I'll insist on going on.
I'm going to go back to this conspiracy theory. When you've got a Scottish
Ronnie, that's what the pub's for.
reporter, pardon?
That's what the pub's for.
We're moving on after this one.
You don't buy pints.
Right,
When you've got a Scottish television reporter going to London and lecturing, and I'm talking about Toonaloo the New going back to 2014, to lecture journalists, newsreaders in London. A wee parochial, well, it's no wee,
get to the point.
a parochial
Morbidly obese.
television presenter going to London and lecturing, like say, some of the big journalists and presenters in London. Is that no thing? Mate? And how to report news items?
It's bad.
These people have been at this for 40 odd years.
It's bad. It's bias, but it's not a conspiracy because.
I'm not buying it, John. Not buying it.
Do you mind if I
like you, but I'm not buying it.
I'm gonna move on to pretend to be teacher here. We've got so much to cover. I haven't got time for all of this. You know these teachers, these kind of liberal modern teachers. They say, "I love to have a conversation. I love to hear the pupils speak and so on." And then the pupils speak too much. They say, "Shut up!" Before I go on, one thing. It's now a book from 1987, I think. Noam Chomsky and Ed Herman. Manufacturing Consent. There's a book called Manufacturing Consent. It explains why I think what I think. Although it's 1987, it's about American foreign affairs and American politics and American media coverage. He says that consent is manufactured through that kind of process of people serving their own interests with no conspiracies required. You don't need. In Soviet Russia, you had conspiracies, and nobody believed the media because they knew they couldn't trust the media. But people in the left, in the West, a lot of people think you can trust the media because it's a democracy. In actual fact, the media in democracies is more biased than the media was in Soviet Russia because people knew it was biased. They didn't believe a word of it. However, so manufacturing consent, that's your homework for next time. Which may never occur, of course. Don't invite me back.
Noted.
Okay. That was the. Okay, we're back to the pigeon poo campaign. Jackie Bird using the words from, the word after was also used here. I got an apology, again a private one. It appears that the fact that the two people had the infection and that they died has been conflated by the intro writer. Who is the intro writer, we wonder? The editor probably. Into the deaths having both been caused by the infection. That was not a conclusion that could be reasonably drawn. We were therefore wrong, and I apologise for that to you personally, but not to anybody else. In this case, I've spoken to all involved and I've emphasised the point you made in your complaint. See Jackie Bird's face again? Yeah, not happy. Should have thought it's not long after that. Can I take some? Probably not.
Take some credit.
Yeah, I'd like to, but I don't think I can do. Okay, and then the more deaths again within babies in another Glasgow hospital. This was quite interesting, if traumatic. Third baby has died after contracting a rare blood infection in maternity hospital. It was revealed in January 2 extremely premature babies had died at the Princess Royal Hospital. Notice the use of the word after there. Not because of, not from, but after. Now, they may have died after so many other things happened that day, but the connection is being made there. Dr. Alan Mather, or Mather, I'm not sure you pronounce that, Chief of Medicine, however, told us to be careful. And we did eventually get to see him on Reporting Scotland. And we discovered that there was a cluster of deaths of babies that were very premature, and that's the key element of this, he said. Sadly, 3 very premature babies have died as a result of prematurity. He hammered it home as a result of prematurity, but are also infected by the organism. We've had a public investigation, a public inquiry into fungal infections in hospitals and other infections in Scottish hospitals. They are in massive decline, infections, if you look at the overall picture, but yet this media-generated public inquiry was required. And BBC Scotland are largely at the root of that having to happen, that massive waste of public money and time. Sorry?
Could it have been the case it was 3 babies or triplets?
I don't know. So, what? Tell me more. Why would that matter?
If there was 3 babies
Yeah.
who were all very premature that had died,
Oh, they'd all infected together. I don't know the answer to that. That wasn't mentioned in the report. He was very clear, but we got him late in the day. The damage was done. Lisa Summers, if ever anybody didn't have a summary manner, it's Lisa Summers, but should be Lisa Winter, really, I think. She drilled over this story, but eventually we get the truth. But by that time the damage is done. The low chemotherapy doses in Tayside here. NHS Tayside generally gets attacked quite a lot. I think that they've seen almost like the old wildebeest at the end, you know, the predators go for NHS Tayside because they somehow sense there's something to be achieved there. And the breast cancer treatment one, this is quite a dramatic one again. Reporting Scotland actually pointed to the possibility of the department being dysfunctional. They used the word dysfunctional. I'll come back to as you see at the bottom there, that nobody else used that word. Lisa Summers, and or the editor at Reporting Scotland, decided to call an NHS department dysfunctional on the basis of this story, as you saw that some patients were being given a lower chemotherapy dose. But as is often the case, we discover more about it from experts. But first of all, this was Jackie Bird who said, there's further criticism tonight of a decision to give breast cancer patients, this was in April, in Tayside lower doses of drugs during chemotherapy than they would have received elsewhere in Scotland. A panel of experts, unnamed, has described the practice as close to being unacceptable. It's a strange phrase, close to being unacceptable. 14 of the patients involved have since died. Ask a primary 7 pupil, why did those patients die? The sentences are quite clear. They died because of the reduced chemotherapy. It's a lie. It's a complete lie, but didn't require a conspiracy. It's just natural for Lisa Summers Link to lie, right, that kind of thing. It's a habitual almost. Very strong implication, they died because of the lower doses. The review group even, this is before a professor from St Andrews came in and blew the whole thing out of the water, the internal review group didn't say that. They said, and they were clearly, I don't know, trying to come up with something from nothing really, I think, because there wasn't hard evidence of any kind. They said the overall assessment of the increased risk of recurrence within the treated cohort, a few hundred women in this case, extremely difficult to quantify, but probably of the order of 1 to 2%. They were just plucking out of the air. A risk of harm of 1 to 2% allows an estimate that around 1 patient per year may have suffered an adverse outcome. Maybe 1 woman died of breast cancer, but they don't know. They don't have any statistics at all. Before the professor emerged to debunk the whole thing, I did a quick look myself at the statistics and discovered there are 3 measures in regard to surviving breast cancer here. I can't remember what they mean. But look at NHS Tayside on the left, the Scottish average in the middle, and then NHS Grampian. You see, NHS Grampian was worse than NHS Tayside in terms of results, but they weren't picked out because Tayside was something they had material on. Somebody had come to Reporting Scotland to complain, a whistleblower you might call them, and so they were going for that. But there wasn't any objective basis. And then, a bit late in the day really, it was 1st of May, and then repeated since then, Professor Mark Chaplin at St Andrews said, women on the lower dose, the same as used in Tayside, benefited from fewer side effects. Like, these can be horrible, the side effects. Worse than horrible perhaps. They did not suffer any inferior chemotherapy treatment because they, statistically speaking, the same recurrence rate and survival probability as the women in the higher dose. There was still a public inquiry into this. This was nothing turned into public inquiry for political reasons. And well, I say no conspiracy on the part of the BBC. Clearly, once the Lib Dems and the Conservatives and Scottish Labour got sight of this, then a conspiracy has emerged to actually somehow undermine the work of the Scottish Government by proxy with regard to the NHS. There was no apology offered at that time by Lisa Summers. And again, a bit later, this is 27th of August, BBC website published this, highly unlikely the NHS case of chemo dosage variations led to death. No apology offered on Distorting Scotland. Yes?
Just out of interest, and maybe the medical people here, my daughter had breast cancer and had chemotherapy and was very ill with the first cocktail.
Yeah.
So what they did was they took one of the drugs in the cocktail and took that level down.
Right.
But they replaced it with something else and just changed the cocktail.
Right.
So it's even possible that maybe one of the drugs in that cocktail was reduced.
Yeah, yeah, I see.
But then replaced by another. So it seems a very strange, given my very limited understanding
Yeah,
of it.
they used the
But I
term
can
lower
remember
dose.
that.
They used the term lower dose. That kind of implies to me that it was the same, but less of them.
But it's quite often a cocktail. It's not just one.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
So she improved dramatically after that because it made her so ill.
Okay.
But what they did was they brought that down and they changed the cocktail
Right. Okay.
within that chemotherapy
Right.
regime,
Fine.
and the side effects were
Yeah.
so much better.
Good. Somebody at the back? Sorry, there's somebody very back there.
When you say a lower dose, normally chemotherapy is done at a 3-week cycle.
Right.
So some people can't take that big heavy dose because of the adverse side effects. So what they do is they then give you a third of that dose, but you get it weekly. So in effect, you still get the same.
Oh,
you
yeah,
get a
yeah.
third of the dose every week.
Right.
Some people
I
just
see.
really can't take it.
I mean, obviously,
That's normally the
yeah.
lower dose.
I mean, they seem to be saying a lower dose in some kind of absolute way, but maybe maybe it's more complex as you point out. Sorry.
Understanding about when my mother was with breast cancer, she basically died with it, and that each cocktail was made per person.
Ah, right.
And
Yeah.
specific to the person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tailored, so I mean that's another fake news headline.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the worst cases, I think.
I think, suppose, once you put something out there,
Yeah.
you don't have to, once it's there and people see it, depending on your kind of attitude towards it, you'll either you believe it 100% or you won't.
Well, it's clearly
And you look
complex and
into
none
it.
of us would know enough.
But I think, just another wee point I wanted to make is that we're hammering the hell out the BBC as always. Now, the STV news, in my opinion, is nothing more than a big stick to whack the Southern General with. They do it every night just about, their main story is about the Southern General, which I attend regularly for treatments. And I've got absolutely nothing but the highest praise for it.
Yeah.
And I tell the staff that and they say, well look, you're always going to get something when you badmouth it. But they say, once it's out there, the damage is done.
Yeah.
You don't need to apologise. If you can apologise,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. It's in somebody else's head,
Yeah.
and they believe
The
it.
damage is done. Yeah.
Damage is done.
I mean, I'd agree. I'm not kind of excusing the rest of the Scottish media
Aye.
by any means. This is a focus on the BBC. Although I do think, and in the run-up to the last couple of elections, I've done some kind of quantitative research on the performance of STV compared to BBC Distorting Scotland, and I've found STV not to be as bad. On the health service, just as bad. On the health service,
Terrible
just
with
as
the
bad.
Southern General.
But some other issues a bit more kind of balanced. Especially since Colin Mackay's arrived, I've noticed some of his reports have been a bit more balanced. And obviously the Herald I think is weakening. I think the Herald's definitely, I mean I haven't done any measure of it, but just looking at it I get the impression, still some ridiculous stories, but more of the stories that you might argue are sympathetic towards independence. But the BBC is the state broadcaster, and what would you expect? I mean they know if they go down if we get independence, they know that. These staff are going to have trouble getting jobs if we get independence. So the fourth case study is this business of staffing. You probably know that NHS Scotland is in most areas better staffed than other parts of the UK. The NHS in the UK as a whole was studied by the Commonwealth Institute in New York in 2015 at the University of New York. And NHS in the UK, including England, is still one of the best performing health services in the world by some way. Way up there in terms of its overall performance, in particular its ability to meet the needs of a wide population. The American service is very good if you're rich, zero if you're not rich. But the NHS in the UK as a whole, I emailed them at the time in 2015 to ask for a breakdown. They're the only, because they're in New York perhaps, they're the only research institute to actually send me the breakdown into the Scottish, Welsh, Northern Ireland and English figures. And I was able to write something at the time about, in particular about the stress perceived by GPs in Scotland by contrast with those in other parts. And they, I've forgotten the thread of that. What was the point of that? Okay. Anyway, so yeah, it was about staffing levels. They had shown that the point was that they were saying that the NHS in Britain is very good, and they have provided a breakdown, the one breakdown I managed to get, but the situation in Scotland is better. And you'll know, I mean, if you follow my blog at all, you know that almost daily I find something where you can actually say, hey, this obviously can infinitely improvable. We could also have better returns, closer to targets and so on. But that on a regular basis, things are better here than the other parts of the UK. Northern Ireland sometimes does quite well actually, one or two of the targets. Okay, so the business of that headline, child health in Scotland at risk over a doctor shortage, that was in March. You just have a quick look at the actual statistics, and that's quite hard to see, but in terms of total staffing in the time of the current government, or the current governments, SNP governments, we've gone from 133,000 to more than 139,000. In terms of doctors, from more than 11,000 to more than 13,000, and for qualified nurses and midwives, from 41,000 a bit over to 43,000 a bit over. So there has been an increase, an objective increase in the staffing. In terms of psychology services, quite a dramatic increase actually. Now, this is clearly an area of growing demand. More children, in particular children, are coming forward or being brought forward for mental health conditions. And maybe it's not enough, but it is increasing. And it's increasing dramatically, and I don't have the figures for the rest of the UK, but I feel pretty confident they won't be anywhere near as good. In terms of GPs, for quite a long time BBC Scotland were ignoring this one. For a good year or more I posted something about the number of GPs per 100,000 in Scotland being much higher than the rest of the UK. And they did eventually get around to it a few months ago, but they spent a good year delaying. Is that bias by delay, perhaps? You know, this is something everybody knows about, but we're not going to talk about it until we absolutely have to. And that's quite a dramatic contrast. Now I know you may have, I'm always meeting people who are, who are yes supporters, but have had a bad experience with their GP or with some aspect of NHS. And I understand that, and I sympathise with that. I haven't actually. I don't think I've had a single bad experience in NHS, but I do understand that they must happen. It's understandable. I'm only interested in the overall figures here, because you can't really talk about anything but what is the overall picture. Trainee journalists are often taught that two very important characteristics of a good report. One is personalisation and one is contextualisation. Personalisation is get somebody who's really experiencing this news phenomenon, somebody who knows what it feels like to be in this situation, interview them. And people out there will think, oh, that's really interesting, and empathise perhaps with the suffering or the experience of that person. That's quite important. That's good journalism to personalise, but only if you also contextualise. And contextualisation is where you say, okay, we've seen the experience of this person, this dramatic experience of this person, what's the picture across the country? Because we, BBC Scotland, have got a royal charter that says we should educate and inform. And if you tell somebody that one person is suffering, and then don't tell them what the picture is across the whole country, you're not informing, you're failing. At times when I've complained to the BBC, I've accused them of failing the royal charter. I hesitate because I'm not very keen on the word royal, but they largely poo-poo that. And this is so when we heard that, this followed on from that previous graph showing Scotland has more GPs per head of population than the other parts of the UK, significantly more in a statistical sense. They opened with this. They found a woman in Stonyburn. I get mixed. Wasn't that on a television programme?
Stonybridge.
Absolutely. Stonybridge, with facilities like the bus stop. So that's Stonyburn, I think. It's probably not the same one. Anyway, so they found Olive Watson, 93, who's losing the practice. Now, that's bad. It's a bad thing that's happened. I mean, I appreciate that. It's hard for her. I understand that. But what's the overall picture isn't really changed by that. That's one case. But that's personalising without contextualising. And first year journalism students have that hammered into them, and yet somehow 30, 40, 50-year-olds at Reporting Scotland don't seem to care about it anymore. They go for the personalisation, they go for the trauma, they interview the crying patient, they interview the crying victim of crime, and don't tell you anything. They had it on a cousin of a child murder victim 17 years ago, I think. They got the cousin on and interviewed her, and didn't tell you there hasn't been a murder of a child, or sorry, a murder by a child since then. They just focused on this trauma. It's tabloidism, really. There was a Scotsman survey, I mean, amazingly, the Scotsman occasionally, they pop up with these things and you think, what? They did a survey and they found 87% of people found it easy to contact their GP. More than 9 in 10 were able to get an appointment within 2 days. I'm sorry if you haven't been in that category. I don't usually manage 2 days, actually, it's been 3 or 4 for me. The end of 2017, GP vacancies were rising at a dramatic level. In England, they were up to 15.3% vacancies. In Scotland, it was 5.6%. And BBC Scotland, with the DMA, will say there's a staffing crisis. Now, obviously, I understand. You would like to see less vacancies for GPs, but there is a difference between 5.6 and 15.3, and it's a difference that matters, and it's one you should hear about before you have an opinion about the situation. And this was the last one, was the business. IVF drug treatment in Scotland seems to be 100%, has been 100% for years. It's never mentioned. I had a wee exchange with, what's his name, one of the presenters in Reporting Scotland. Stuart's the second name.
Don't listen to it, sorry.
Sorry? Anyway, somebody Stuart, he's often a presenter, and he actually engaged with me on Twitter when I'd slagged something he'd reported on. So he made me think there isn't a conspiracy. I thought, you believe this? You believe you're doing the best here? He said it was because I had attacked them for always reporting when a target wasn't hit, and never reporting when a target was hit. And he said, "What do you want us to? We can't repress the truth. You know, we must report on all of these things." And he seemed quite indignant about it. And one of the things I had to say, well, why don't you ever mention this? Raymond Stewart. Seems nice enough guy, you know. But I thought he was somebody who's pretty much a dupe of that system.
So what was his response to that then?
His response was that they do report on it, and the public want to know about the negative things as well. It's in the public's interest to know about the failures. You know, good news is no news. That kind of thing. It's a kind of journalistic myth, isn't it? So in Scotland, 100% screened within the target time has been met for now 6 years, I think, since then. The failure to treat infertility can result in problems and further costs. There's a Danish study that shows that women who are unable to have children are 47% more likely to be hospitalised for schizophrenia, and a significantly higher risk of subsequent drug and alcohol abuse. So any kind of health target doesn't exist by itself. In NHS England, only 12% of boards offer 3 full cycles. 61% offer only 1 cycle, and 4% offer none at all. Private treatment at the time cost between 1,300 and 5,700. There are 64 Tory and New Labour MPs with links to private healthcare. Could that be a reason? I think, and finally, you've seen Scotland, of course, is the worst place for drug deaths. The Tories have loved this particular story that drug addicts are dying in huge numbers. There are some statistical explanations for that, which I won't go on here. But the NHS Scotland has been smashing the targets for treatment. Not mentioned at all. I think I'm going to finish on that. And on the way home I'll be reflecting about conspiracies much more now. Of course, this could mean you're all suffering from paranoia.
Of course we are.
You need treatment.
Of course we are.
Are you getting treated properly? Health professionals really haven't fought back and the SNP don't play all the SNP leadership. I think that's a conscious strategy which follows strong vote being appointed. They reject Simon's combative approach and they say we'll just try and professionally combat and they might, I mean, I don't know if mixed feelings about it. Did you raise that before? Oh, me too. It's a difficult
We've got about 20 minutes left before we have to clear out, so we can do a quick question and answer session. So, first one, somebody when I was advertising this online, somebody asked the question, and somebody asked the question, says, well look, he says, I can't be there, can you ask the question? So I'm going to ask the question for him. So I'm doing the first question. So a lot of the stuff that comes through these things with the BBC is to do with freedom of information requests. Now, have you done anything on how many freedom of information requests go in Scotland in comparison with the health boards in England and Wales?
No, I haven't done a comparison, but I should say that my blog is, there's a search option on my blog, and if you search, you can search for anything at all, and I must have written more than 4,000 articles now since 2014, and I think I must have missed something, but you never know. But there's certainly stuff about freedom of information, and one of the things that's quite apparent is people like Liam MacArthur in Orkney asking constantly freedom of information requests in Scottish Prison Service, trying to find something, anything that you can then feed to Distorting Scotland to again undermine the image of the Scottish Government's management of the prison service. But I haven't done a comparison with England. I mean, BBC UK do ask freedom of information requests. I don't know.
I was wondering if it was higher here.
Yeah, I don't know. That'd be an interesting thing.
Yeah.
Be a big job.
There'll be more freedom to request information from the Scottish Government than that's the Westminster.
Yeah.
Oh, so you?
Yeah, Please over Scotland done something. Almost something in 2007 it was, when the Labour Liberal they finished. There was a 700% increase in the same time period of the SNP.
No, I don't want to get in competition with Wings here.
That's what we said.
But I did something on that, and I showed the increase since the SNP came in the government. The demand, the request, number of freedom of information requests went through the roof. So you might have ripped off me.
Right, there was a question at the front first, was there?
Okay, there's one at the front which I think I will come to everybody.
Yeah, John, just to ask you about if you ever contacted the SNP to complain about the BBC's attitude to some of the stuff come out of.
I mean, I've got some contacts in the SNP, but quite limited. And my impression, and I had a bit of a contact with Alex Salmon's team more than I do now. I think maybe I'm seen as too operated, too kind of, tabloidy maybe, some of my headlines. And I think the current strategy is to seem professional. Since Nicola took over and since Alec went, I think to seem like they're on the job, so they can't be criticised. And if somebody complains about the NHS, they say we'll do something about that. And if media coverage is biased, they might make a contrary comment of some kind, but they won't attack. Clearly, it's a strategy. It's a strategy to seem mature, adult, professional.
I'm pretty sure that's
so the answer is no. I mean, it's hardly ending in the SNP. There are times I've thought they've read something, but it's not really very fun.
Sometimes I think Gene Freeman's quite good.
Yes, I think they're all capable, but they clearly have a strategy here. They think it alienates some people if they fight too much, and if they seem maybe immature and short-tempered, aggressive, and so on. And I think some voters don't like that.
A question from
John. You kind of touched on it in your talk, but surely the Yes movement needs comparative statistics for Scotland and England, Wales, whatever, in lots of general areas, so do you know if these exist?
Well, I'm going on my blog again. I think I do that on an almost daily basis. I put something about some aspect where the Herald has reported on, I don't know, staffing problems here. I'll put in the same article, I'll put the English or the Welsh or whatever papers. So it's called Talking Up Scotland 2. It's online, and you just search, you'll find stuff of that kind, I hope, quite regularly. But that whole business of comparisons, occasionally you get attacked for that. It's called Butterbootery. There's a guy, a Scotsman, who's now a Brexit candidate, I think from Northumberland or something, I can't remember his name now. He attacked me for Butterbootery, and he said, it doesn't matter how good or bad England is, it's how good are things in Scotland. That's what people want to know about. So I was accused of doing that comparatively. Now, somebody with a sociological background, I think the only way you can understand if something matters at all is to compare it. But I hope you'll check my blog out. It's free.
Jim?
We sort of we went to the Leslie Riddick about 18 months ago, and
she was quite clear that they were only reading off the script that they were given.
Yeah.
But I remember back in, you know, sort of the latter days of the 2014 referendum, and it was, I mean, she gave Alex Salmond, who was obviously the First Minister at the time, she gave him a torrid time, but Alistair Darling was just an easy ride.
Yeah.
So
that phenomenon has been repeated a few times. I think less common now, but maybe when there's another vote coming up, it'll maybe surface again. Haley Miller at Good Morning Scotland is classic for that kind of thing.
Interrupting.
Can I interrupt you then?
No.
You're next.
David?
Yeah. Whether it's a conspiracy or bias, what can we do to combat the distortion?
Right. I think it's water on a stone, kind of Chinese idea here. I spent a bit of time with Amnesty International in the past, and their philosophy is you shouldn't expect a lot quickly, but you shouldn't give up. You just keep on going. So you just keep on. So every day I write stuff. It's become an addiction. I think it's not. I'm not saying. I'm just addicted. And I think you keep on sharing, keep on talking, and especially listening to know people who are no voters. You know, not hammering them straight away. Listening to them and trying to understand their anxieties. So a lot of it was anxiety. And as you know, the fear campaign played on that. Yeah, there's not much of an answer to it, isn't it? It's a bit, because you want things to happen more quickly. We all do. But we're kind of getting there, aren't we? We're kind of, you know, we're 50-50 now, from 45 to 50. It's been slow. It's been slow, but yes.
They say that they talk about a lie could be halfway in the world before you get to bed in the morning.
Yeah.
Is that how you feel every morning you get to bed to see the BBC lies been the night before?
Yeah, I mean, I go into Google first thing. I mean, I'm up really early. I don't sleep much. I don't know why that is, but I don't sleep much. And I'm up really. So maybe about 5:30 in the morning, I'll be cup of coffee and sit in front of the computer. And my first Google search is for the phrase "Good News Scotland." Okay, and up comes the Herald and the Scotsman and the BBC and so on. And the first thing I do is I look at the BBC, Scotland, then BBC UK and England, to make comparisons, and I have a great time with BBC Wales. Something's happening in BBC Wales. They've got a rogue there. BBC Wales had an article about some Tory who lied in a rape case, and the article mentioned the word Conservative or Tory 11 times, and his name was England. His second name was England, and they had England 5 or 6 times. And I thought, if a Reporting Scotland reporter sees that, they'll faint. So BBC Wales is quite useful to look at, and it's later, obviously. Tailing. On the back.
John, like yourself, I'm up very early, and I listened to.
Sorry, you were. We missed some of the debate.
I listened to Good Morning Scotland intently every day. Sometimes when I put my dashboard in, but that's what doesn't matter. What do you think of the phenomenon that actually exists that the real news disappearing at 7:30 when parents start to go up to put their kids out? That's a fact,
Sorry, I'm not sure what question was there.
So what do you think of the phenomenon, and you being a media analyst, did you see it in other radio stations? I mean, between 6, when it comes on after the money programme, between 5 and 6, between 6 and 7:30, you get some really decent news articles out of Good Morning Scotland. Really? But come 7:30, it becomes fluff, as I call it. You know, fluffy kitten stuck up a tea quite bank, fireman, and all the stuff that had happened prior to that, between 6 and 7:30, the actual news seems to disappear.
I have to admit, I have never listened to Good Morning Scotland. I'm not strong enough. I've got one or two accomplices who listen to it and then tell me to listen to it, but I don't. That's an interesting point, but I don't know the answer. I must admit. I'm sorry. This lady at the front was
I was going to ask you why you think Amnesty International is not taking up the case of Julian Assange.
Well, that's a very good point. I'm not part of Amnesty International now because there were some previous issues where they were campaigning for the release of Islamic fundamentalists. Quite honestly, with terrible attitude towards women and other groups in society, and I thought I'd rather be stayed in jail, to be honest. I mean, they may well be being treated badly by a totalitarian government in some part of the Arab world, but I think, you know, as I said, their attitudes to women and to gays and so on is reprehensible. So I don't really have much of an empathy for Amnesty now, and I think that they've kind of lost the plot. bet.
Because he's in isolation in Belmarsh
I
prison.
know, it's disgraceful.
And the report on that prison is absolutely appalling.
Yeah,
The health, the shower and
right. Do you know anything about it? I mean, do you know the answer yourself?
no,
Yeah,
I
I
want
would know,
to
yeah.
know because I would like to think when we become independent
Yeah,
that we wouldn't do that to a man who was doing his job, telling
yeah,
people how it is.
yeah, absolutely.
You know, the war.
I wonder if Amnesty International's going to have lost the plot a wee bit. And I think it's over this business of the...
I mean, he was a journalist.
Yeah.
John Pilcher is really worried about him.
Yeah.
You know?
I agree, absolutely.
And we all know about John Pilcher. He's an honest man.
Yes, I would say so. Yeah.
So,
And always on, I mean, I used to watch John Pilger way back, but he was always on about 11:30 when I really should have been in bed. Sorry.
I'll be interested to see when we were talking earlier on about bias and all the rest of it, when it was 2014 and Sarah Smith suddenly appeared with a lovely programme during the independence referendum. I said to my husband, that set distresses me because the colouring of it was doom, gloom, terrifying. It was dark reds, dark purples, an angry looking sky. So I'll be really interested to see if the people who build the sets when it comes to the next indie reg are trying to terrify us as much with the colours that they choose on the set, because that was impending doom. The whole colour scheme of Sarah Smith's programme was terrifying. So I'll be interested to
Propaganda by colours.
Oh,
That's new. That's a new one for me. I hadn't really thought about that.
It was unbelievable.
It's a visual thing, John.
John, how dirty do you think the next independence referendum will get? How dirty and stinking will it get?
They haven't got an obvious leader anymore. Ruth.
John, they have got MI5, so they've got leadership.
But see, look, this is a complex issue, and I don't claim it. I know a bit about media theory and stuff like that, and people think I know about other things just because of the professor thing. Russia Today, I was on 3 times, and it was about the referendum, right? And I answered questions about that. They obviously then thought he must be sympathetic to Russia because he's come on our programme 3 times. So they asked me who I thought had downed that airliner. Was it the Ukrainians or the Russians? Hoping I would say, well, there's no evidence it was the Russians that did it. And it's because they thought, Professor, he must know about everything. It's a dangerous thing, and there are lots of people who play on it. There are professors who come on television all the time who talk about things they go absolutely shite about. So I don't know the answer to that. Really, your question, I don't answer that. But one thing I do know is that there is a movement within the Conservative Party called Compass, which might be in our interest, and to have just lifetime control, generational control of England, and just to get rid of Scotland, Wales, and Scotland.
I want to recommend everybody see the film Official Secrets with Keira Knightley, telling how it was when she was working for GCHQ, and she knew that it was a lie that was being put forward.
Yes, she's playing that woman who was sacked, wasn't she? It's true story.
Well, she was, the case came up, but they didn't charge her, although she said she had spilt the beans.
Was she sacked, or did she just resign in fear, or I don't know what happened?
Well, the film ends with her being astonished that the case didn't come.
Right.
She was going to give them all this bad publicity.
Yeah, I know.
She felt it her responsibility to speak up, to tell the world it was a lie. And look what happened to Dr. Kelly.
Well,
you know, and you think there's no conspiracy?
Oh, well, no, I didn't say that. I think there was definitely a conspiracy to kill Dr. Kelly. Absolutely. And you might argue, but I don't think there was a conspiracy for the BBC technology.
But Jackie Bird wasn't involved in that one.
A wee bit crystal ball gazing in the future, independent Scotland. Now, Southern Ireland pays something like 4 billion, 4.5 billion or something for BBC services.
No.
Well, they pay money.
I'd heard that they only
What? Sorry, David?
252 million.
Right, well.
I'd heard that they only buy EastEnders, nothing else.
Right. What, again, in independent Scotland, do we get rid of them totally as a BBC or British propaganda?
Oh, you mean the BBC as a whole?
Yes.
Well, obviously we wouldn't buy BBC News. I mean, can't imagine we
I know.
would. But presumably are the
I'll
nature,
certainly not be
are the
buying
nature
it, I've never
documentaries
voted for it.
okay? Would you have the nature documentaries? I don't have a strong opinion about this. So,
Do you need to buy anything? I mean, we won't party it anyway. I mean, 8%
Well,
of it's ours, but what we're going to buy, I mean, it's 8% of BBC belongs to Scotland.
yeah.
Well, we shut it down and start with AIM Broadcast Corporation.
I think if you're independent, they can't spout all that rubbish at all.
That's not how it works, Ronnie. What happens is you take a B down, you put an S up. That's how it works.
That's on that phrase, you take the B down and put an S. Just when I heard that phrase, you take the B down, I thought it'd be S. Anybody else, are we for time or okay?
Yeah, I think we've got a couple of minutes if we've any last questions.
Can I ask, if they say you're not having your referendum in independence, so then next stage, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, again, it's that, you know, I know, but I mean, I was professor of media politics. I wasn't professor of politics. So actually, I don't really know much about that, about the constitutional matters. But I don't think it really matters much. I think it might help if they refuse it. So I think, sure, you think it will happen regardless. I think we're just heading that way because of what I said earlier. I think the establishment in the UK doesn't care anymore, and nor do they like it. Some of these opinion polls show that there's huge contempt for Scotland amongst people in England, and would happily, and they believe they're subsidising us. So,
Scotland's more educated since the last referendum.
I'm being distracted. The gentleman at the back with the glasses and the bonnet there is the double of my former boss. Sorry? You look just like Professor Ian Mentor. Who's English?
He was out last night as well.
who kind of hop skipped. He came to University of the West of Scotland, then got a job at the University of Glasgow, and then Oxford. And he kind of skipped back to where he wanted to be, obviously. But you're his double.
So there's a road up for you, Cam. Never too late for a education.
It's not so much a question, but in the last point you made about in England believing that they subsidise it.
Yeah.
It's even worse than that. In Scotland, some people believe that England subsidises it. You know, it's how do you change that concept?
Good point.
I think just keep going. I know it's not much help, is it? I make a rotten football manager. Just keep going. Sorry.
Two questions. Do you think the BBC will change when it looks like independence is inevitable?
Yeah.
No. And what will the BBC purpose be after independence?
I think when it becomes apparent that independence is going to happen, I think the Herald, the Scotsman and STV will swing very quickly because they're businesses. They're just businesses. The BBC, I don't know what's going to happen to the BBC. I think there's a good chance it'll be shut down.
Yep. Hopefully.
And I think, unfortunately, the SNP leadership is so, kind of calm, professional, rational, and so on. They'll re-employ someone, and that would be somewhere membership. Either was great. Isabel's quite good actually. I think Isabel's okay. She's okay.
She's been part of after having that spat with
yeah, with the
Labour guy Davison.
Sorry, I don't know if I answered your question really.
So we nearly finished on a high note there because he said they were going to shut the BBC down. And then they put an F on it. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. Time's up unfortunately. But I'd like to thank you all coming. I'm amazed that you came from the area, from Glasgow and from Hamilton, from all over. Cumbernauld, and if I haven't mentioned you, sorry. Chapel Hall, but people come from Chapel
Overseas.
Hall. Overseas. For those of you that don't live locally, Chapel Hall doesn't even have electricity yet.
One thing at a time.
So, thanks for coming. We will have more events coming up. Probably not towards the end of this year because I think it's going to be election year and things. So it will probably be the start of next year before we start to do any more talks. So this is probably our last one for now.
Will this be the preferred time, do you think?
It may well be, it seems to have worked.
Aye, for them it doesn't go to church.
Yeah.
It's true.
There was some football at Rangers were playing today, and they're not a big We don't get a lot of Rangers supporters. We've got Jim. We've got Jim. We don't have many Rangers supporters from here. So for the moment, have a good Christmas.
Yeah.
Have a happy New Year.
Hope to see you before that.
And enjoy your Brexit, whenever that may be. If you remember, we do need your donations to help pay for the cost of the hall. So if you can make a donation, I'd like to thank you. If you can put it in at the back, we've got a couple of bits of merchandise there. And the last thing I'd like you to do is give a big round of applause.
A big round of applause for Jim as well.
Right, pub's open.